A wealthy businessman is found dead, but in his pocket, something no one expects grains. Why? Let's uncover the dark secret behind this case. A sprawling, luxurious mansion nestled in an affluent neighborhood, its grand architecture standing proudly against the backdrop of a cloud-filled sky. The mansion's large windows reflect a gloomy day as the faint sound of a thunderstorm rumbles in the distance, heightening the tension. Rex Fortescue, the wealthy businessman, a man who has lived a life of power and influence. His sharp features and commanding presence are now still, as his body is found slumped over his mahogany desk, eyes wide open but lifeless. He is the picture of a man who has been struck down in his prime, leaving an air of unfinished business behind him. It's late afternoon when the discovery is made. The room smells faintly of old wood and polished leather, a stark contrast to the chilling sight before the investigating officers. Rex's body is motionless in his expensive leather chair, the remnants of his last breath still lingering in the air. But the real puzzle lies in his hands. In his right hand, tightly clenched, is a small crumpled pocket of rye grains, the oddness of which sends a shiver down the spine of the lead investigator. Detective Clara Mills. She had been to many crime scenes in her career, but never had she seen a clue as baffling as this. Rye. It's an odd choice. A harmless grain found in most bakeries, but here it's not just a symbol of food, it's a cryptic message that no one can yet decipher. Suspense. Detective Mills leans in, her sharp eyes scanning the desk for any other signs of foul play. The office is immaculate, organized to a fault. There's no sign of a struggle, no obvious weapon. Just the rye and Rex's cold, pale face staring into nothingness. The question rises in the air. What could Rye possibly have to do with his death? Her fingers touch the edge of the desk, tracing the faint outline of an untouched glass of whiskey, a drink half poured, as if Rex had been interrupted before finishing it. The officer standing next to her whispers, "No signs of forced entry. It's like he knew the killer." Mills takes a deep breath, her mind racing. The room is still. The walls, the rich leather furnishings, the polished wood floor, they all seem to breathe with an air of secrets. The rye, the only clue, is impossible to ignore. Tension mounts. The house feels eerily quiet now, as the officers exchange glances. Every corner of the mansion seems to be whispering something they can't yet understand. Was it a simple poisoning? Was the rye some kind of twisted clue left by the killer? Or was it a sick, personal message intended for someone specific? The detectives have no answers, only more questions. Mills watches as the paramedics zip up Rex's body, taking away what should have been a final moment of peace for the man who had it all. But Rex Fortescue's story is far from over. Hook. As the scene begins to clear, Detective Mills finds herself alone in the office, staring at the rye in Rex's hand. She reaches down, pulling a few grains free from his clenched fingers. But as she does, a sharp, guttural sound breaks the silence. A woman's voice whispers from the hallway, "Don't touch it." Mills freezes. Her breath catches in her throat. She turns slowly toward the door, her hand still hovering over the rye. End scene. Standing in the doorway, her face shadowed and unreadable, is Rex's wife, Eleanor Fortescue. "If you want to know what killed him," Eleanor says quietly, her voice barely above a whisper, "you'll have to understand the rhyme." Mills stares at her, confused, as the weight of Eleanor's words settles heavily in the room. The rye, the rhyme. The pieces are beginning to fall into place, but only just. Cliffhanger. The camera lingers on Eleanor's face, her eyes filled with something dark and knowing. And as she steps back into the shadows, the detective's fingers tighten around the rye, and the true mystery begins to unfold. Hercule Poirot's arrival. The storm outside raged with relentless fury, its thunder rolling across the sky like the growl of an unseen beast. Sheets of rain pelted the driveway, drumming against the sleek black car that had just pulled up before the imposing Fortescue mansion. The doors of the grand estate groaned as they swung open, a sound that seemed to echo through the very bones of the house. And then, a figure stepped out. Hercule Poirot. His polished shoes met the gravel with deliberate precision, his impeccable black overcoat barely stirring despite the howling wind. Under the dim porch light, his sharp eyes glinted with something unreadable, a stark contrast to the storm's chaos. He was composed, assured, an unshakable force stepping into the heart of uncertainty. Inside, the house was a different kind of storm. The foyer was a swirl of hushed voices, hurried footsteps, and the lingering remnants of a crime that had unsettled everyone under this roof. Policemen, previously bustling in a frenzied attempt to make sense of the murder, froze momentarily at the sight of him. His reputation had preceded him, as it always did. Even amid their scattered notes and conflicting theories, they understood one thing now: everything would change. Poirot removed his hat, brushing off a stray raindrop from the brim before handing it to a hesitant butler. Then, with a composed gait, he stepped forward, his gaze already sweeping across the scene, taking in everything: the atmosphere, the tension, the barely concealed fear in the air. The crime had not merely disturbed the house, it had infected it, seeping into every corner, every breath. The scene of the crime. The office where Rex Fortescue had met his untimely end was draped in an unsettling quiet. Though the body had been removed, the presence of death lingered. The very air was thick with it. Poirot's eyes flickered to the desk, where an innocuous yet bizarre clue lay in what, a handful of rye, resting as if it had been left there deliberately. He stepped forward, adjusting the cuffs of his coat with precise care, a gesture as methodical as the workings of his mind. To the untrained eye, the rye was absurd, a meaningless detail. But Poirot knew better. In the vast web of lies, it was often the smallest thread that unraveled the truth. And this was no triviality. His fingers brushed over the grains, feeling their texture, his thoughts whirring. A peculiar clue indeed. A whisper from the killer-a-taunt, a message, or perhaps a breadcrumb trail leading to something far darker. Poirot spoke then, his voice measured, thoughtful. Rye, yes. Such a peculiar clue. A message from a mind much more devious. Silence followed his words, heavy and charged. In that silence, Poirot observed. He saw the way the officers held their breath, waiting for his verdict. He saw the way the family members stiffened, their carefully crafted facades trembling under the weight of their own secrets. The family's reactions. Eleanor Fortescue stood near the back of the room, her hands folded in front of her like a marble statue carved into grief. But her eyes betrayed her. Poirot had seen true grief, raw and unfiltered. This was not it. Her gaze did not linger on the space where her husband had died. No, she was thinking, calculating, planning her next move. And Poirot suspected she was doing so with far too much ease. Charles Fortescue, the son, stood stiffly, shifting his weight from foot to foot. A thin sheen of sweat glistened on his brow, his fingers twitching at his side as though resisting the urge to shove them deep into his pockets. When Poirot's gaze landed on him, the young man's jaw tightened, a telltale sign of nervousness or guilt. Sarah, the daughter, was an entirely different enigma. Dressed in expensive finery, she was the picture of sophistication. But something was off. Her expression was too vacant, her eyes too distant. She smiled when the moment called for it, but the smile was hollow. There was a coldness about her, one that spoke of deep wounds and long-buried resentments. And then there was the staff. The butler, Mr. Hargrove, stood with a stoic expression, but Poirot noted the way his fingers trembled ever so slightly against the seam of his trousers. The maid, young and jittery, kept glancing toward the exit, her feet angled ever so slightly away, as if she was fighting the impulse to flee. Each one of them was hiding something. The only question was what? The first question. Poirot turned away from the desk, stepping toward the gathered family members. They braced themselves, anticipating what was to come, their discomfort palpable. "I must ask," he began, his voice smooth yet unyielding. "Where were you all when Mr. Fortescue was killed?" The tension in the room thickened, like the air before a lightning strike. Each person looked at the other, searching for cues, for some unspoken agreement on how to answer. Poirot saw it all, the hesitation, the half-starts of explanations that quickly died on their tongues. No one spoke. Poirot took another step forward, his gaze unwavering. Were you all at the dinner table, or did one of you leave, perhaps for a moment of solitude? His words were deliberate, laced with an edge that made the family shift uncomfortably. He was not just asking a question. He was watching their reactions, peeling back the layers of their defenses with every passing second. Finally, Eleanor cleared her throat, her voice carefully measured. We were all together. Poirot raised a single brow. All. A beat of silence. Charles shifted again. Sarah clasped her hands too tightly. The maid bit her lip. The butler's jaw twitched. Poirot did not need to hear their answers. Their bodies spoke the truth. He turned, walking back to the desk, running a finger over the edge of the wooden surface. The rhyme, the secrecy that wrapped around this case like an invisible noose. This was no simple murder. It was something far, far more sinister. And Hercule Poirot would unravel every single thread until the truth lay bare. The Fortescue family and the secret. The investigation moves deeper into the heart of the Fortescue family. Poirot, having carefully observed each family member at the crime scene, now begins his work of unraveling their pasts layer by layer. Rex Fortescue was no ordinary man, and his family is no ordinary family. Each one seems to hold a piece of a fractured, dangerous puzzle. As Poirot sits down in the grand sitting room of the mansion, with its marble floors and elegant drapery, the family members reluctantly gather. There is tension in the air, thick enough to be felt in every breath. Poirot's observations. The first to speak is Eleanor Fortescue, Rex's wife, who approaches Poirot with a look of deep sorrow. But Poirot doesn't miss the tightness around her mouth, the subtle tension in her shoulders that betrays her otherwise composed facade. My husband is dead, and I have nothing left, she says, her voice trembling slightly. But her eyes. Poirot knows a mask when he sees one. The eyes are too cold, too calculating. There's something she's not saying. Something buried beneath the grief. Poirot looks at her, his gaze unwavering. Madame, he says softly, grief is a powerful thing, but it can also be deceptive. Are you certain you have no other feelings about your husband's death? His words are quiet, measured, but they cut through the pretense like a knife. Eleanor falters, her lips trembling, but then quickly recovers. I am shocked, of course, but the house must go on. Rex was everything to this family, but we must carry on his legacy. Poirot nods slowly. Yes, of course, carry on his legacy. His words are laced with meaning, and he watches her carefully, noting how her eyes flicker for just a moment, as if a dark thought crosses her mind. Eleanor turns away sharply, as if to hide her discomfort. Suspense and intrigue. Poirot shifts his attention to Rex's children Charles and Sarah. Charles, the son, stands with his arms crossed, shifting his weight from one foot to the other, a sure sign of agitation. He has inherited his father's sharp business acumen, but the bitterness in his eyes speaks volumes. His father's death has left him hungry for the wealth he's always been promised, but now there's a quiet anger bubbling beneath the surface. Charles knows that his inheritance is now uncertain. He makes no effort to mask his resentment, as Poirot asks, "Tell me, Monsieur Charles, were you very close to your father?" Charles sneers, his voice clipped. I've spent my life being pushed aside for his interests. I should have been the one leading the company, not him. But of course, he didn't care about my opinions. He never did. Poirot observes him carefully, noting the sharp tone and the bitter edge to his words. There's more to his anger than just a rivalry for wealth. It's as if Charles has been trapped in the shadows for too long, and now he's angry about everything Rex has done to him, or more likely, everything Rex didn't do. Sarah, the daughter, is the picture of grace, her demeanor calm and serene. But Poirot sees past her beauty to the sharp edges beneath. She speaks with a soft, controlled voice, almost too polite. Father was always so driven, she says, her smile thin. I suppose we all have our own ways of coping with loss. But Poirot doesn't buy it. Her every word is measured, as if she's playing a role in a theater performance. The controlled nature of her tone sends a ripple of suspicion through Poirot's mind. There's something behind that perfect smile, something she's hiding. Poirot probes further. As the family members grow uneasy under his gaze, Poirot turns his attention to the servants, who are standing at the edge of the room, trying to blend into the shadows. The butler, Mr. Hargrove, is an older man with a weathered face, his eyes hard and unyielding. His quiet demeanor suggests years of service and loyalty, but Poirot wonders what lies beneath the surface. "And you, Mr. Hargrove?" Poirot asks. His voice is gentle as a summer breeze. "Did you know Mr. Fortescue well?" The butler hesitates, then replies with a measured tone. "I served him for many years, sir. As a servant, it is not my place to interfere with my employer's business." Poirot's eyes narrow slightly. "Ah, but you must have witnessed many things in those years, perhaps more than you would care to admit." The butler's eyes flicker, ever so slight, just enough to tell Poirot there's something he's holding back. The maid, a younger woman named Clara, stands nearby, wringing her hands nervously. She looks far younger than the rest of the household staff, and her anxious demeanor suggests she is out of her depth in this world of opulence and power. Poirot watches her for a moment, noting her nervous glances toward the door, her body language screaming discomfort. "And you, Mademoiselle Clara?" Poirot inquires. "Did Mr. Fortescue treat you well?" Clara's eyes dart around the room before she stammers. "I didn't. We didn't have much interaction. I was just doing my duties, sir." But Poirot doesn't miss the way she tucks a lock of hair behind her ear as she answers, the slight tremor in her voice. She knows something, or at least has seen something. Suspense builds. Poirot shifts back to the family members, his eyes now sharper than ever. He can feel that there's something dark at play here. The motives for Rex's death are tangled in layers of secrets. Affairs, hidden debts, family scandals long buried beneath years of wealth and privilege. No one is as innocent as they seem. The more Poirot digs, the more he uncovers. Rex Fortescue, the powerful businessman, had more enemies than he had friends. Business deals gone wrong, alliances betrayed, lovers who had been cast aside. Each of these revelations adds more weight to the mystery. And as Poirot pieces them together, he begins to see a family at war with itself, driven by greed, resentment, and the desperate desire to keep a dark secret buried forever. The pressure builds as the family grows more defensive, their composure unraveling at the seams. Eleanor, Charles, Sarah, Mr. Hargrove, and Clarithair, all hiding something. And Poirot is on the verge of uncovering it all. The link to the nursery rhyme. The investigation has reached a critical turning point. Poirot has been working tirelessly, pulling at the loose threads of the Fortescue family's secrets. But now, he uncovers something chilling, something unexpected, that begins to tie everything together. It all starts with a single, seemingly innocuous clue: a nursery rhyme. The rhyme had been a favorite of Rex Fortescue. It had come up in conversation just days before his death, and now, Poirot's mind races as he recalls the words Rex had idly quoted at dinner. The rhyme, long forgotten in the recesses of children's memories, suddenly seems far too significant to ignore. In fact, it eerily mirrors the events surrounding Rex's murder. The rhyme, innocently recited in the midst of an afternoon conversation, begins to reverberate in Poirot's mind. "Sing a song of sixpence, a pocket full of rye, 24 blackbirds baked in a pie. When the pie was opened, the birds began to sing. Wasn't that a dainty dish to set before the king?" At first, Poirot dismisses it as coincidence, a child's rhyme that had lost its meaning over the years. But then, like a spark of lightning in the dark, it hits him. The rhyme doesn't just tell a story. It foretells a sequence of events. Poirot's realization. Poirot steps back from his notes, his mind racing. Rye, birds, pie. These are not just nonsensical words strung together, they are significant. Each line seems to reflect a part of the murder, a strange pattern unfolding in front of his eyes. The mention of rye immediately draws his attention back to the clue found with Rex's body, a pocket full of rye. He feels the hairs on the back of his neck rise as he recognizes the rhyme's unsettling relevance to the crime. The 4 and 20 blackbirds, could they be a metaphor for the family? The people closest to Rex's wife, children, servants, are they the blackbirds trapped in the pie? Is it a hint about how these people are caught in a deadly game, with Rex as the unwilling king who has been betrayed? The rhyme's final lines, "When the pie was opened, the birds began to sing," seems to indicate that the truth, once revealed, will send shockwaves through the family. But who will be the one to sing? And what exactly is the pie? Poirot's gaze sharpens. He knows now that the murder is no random act of violence. It is calculated, precise, a killing woven into the framework of something much older, much more sinister. He lifts his head and surveys the room, his piercing eyes settling on each suspect in turn. He is close now. The answer lies just beneath the surface, waiting to be uncovered. And when it is, the whole house of cards will come crashing down. Suspense unraveled. Poirot's discovery. The air inside Yew Tree Lodge was heavy with unease, an almost suffocating presence of something unspoken. Poirot sat at the grand dining table, his fingertips pressed together, his mind racing through the puzzle before him. The Fortescue family secrets were unraveling one by one, but now, he had stumbled upon something far more chilling, something that could no longer be dismissed as mere coincidence. A nursery rhyme. At first glance, it was nothing more than a harmless relic of childhood, a melody woven into the fabric of countless generations. But Poirot knew better. A rhyme, when recited at the right moment, in the right context, could be more than playful versetti, could be a cipher, a riddle, or worse, a warning. He recalled the casual way in which Rex Fortescue had recited it, just days before his death, a careless remark during dinner. And now, as Poirot repeated the words under his breath, the hairs on the back of his neck stood on end. Sing a song of sixpence, a pocket full of rye, 4 and 20 blackbirds baked in a pie. When the pie was opened, the birds began to sing. Wasn't that a dainty dish to set before the king? The realization strikes. Poirot's sharp mind latched onto the implications. The first line alone sent a shiver through him. A pocket full of rye. That had been the very clue found on Rex Fortescue's body. It was too precise, too deliberate to ignore. And the second line, 4 and 20 blackbirds baked in a pie. Was it a metaphor? The members of the Fortescue family, trapped within the household, bound by old grudges, hidden alliances, and unspoken resentments, were they the blackbirds, caught in an intricate game of deceit? Then, the final, most unsettling verse. When the pie was opened, the birds began to sing. What did it mean? That when the truth was exposed, some, perhaps many, would finally break, revealing what they had been so desperate to keep hidden. Poirot sat back, the weight of realization pressing upon him. This was no mere child's song. This was a map, a darkly poetic blueprint of Rex Fortescue's murder. Cracks in the facade. As Poirot wandered through the house, retracing the steps of the deceased patriarch, he observed everything anew. Eleanor Fortescue, Rex's widow, had played the part of the grieving wife well, but there was something unnerving in her restraint. She had not shed a single tear. And Charles, the son, had seemed more annoyed than heartbroken, his temper flaring when the rhyme was mentioned. Then there was Jennifer, the stepdaughter, whose quiet presence spoke volumes. She had watched the others too carefully, her eyes dark pools of concealed emotion, and the servants, Mr. Hargrove, the butler, had stiffened noticeably when Poirot had casually recited the verse over tea. Clara, the maid, had dropped a silver tray, her hands trembling as she gathered the fallen cups. They were afraid. But of what? Or whom? The confrontation. Poirot gathered them all in the drawing room that evening, the fire casting long, flickering shadows on the walls. The atmosphere was taut with anticipation, fear seeping into every corner of the room. He stood before them, his eyes keen and unrelenting, and with deliberate precision, he repeated the rhyme once more. Sing a song of sixpence, a pocket full of rye. A sharp intake of breath from Clara, a twitch in Mr. Hargrove's jaw, Eleanor's fingers tightening around the armrest. 4 and 20 blackbirds baked in a pie. Charles shifted uncomfortably, his lips pressing into a thin line. When the pie was opened, the birds began to sing. Silence. A thick, suffocating silence. Poirot's voice dropped lower, colder. It is no coincidence, mes amis, that this nursery rhyme foretells the crime. He let his gaze sweep across the room, watching their reactions like a hawk circling its prey. I do not believe Rex Fortescue quoted this rhyme in passing. None. He was leaving a message, a clue. A flicker of panic crossed Eleanor's face, gone in an instant, but Poirot had seen it. He knew, Poirot continued, his voice unwavering. He knew something was coming. Perhaps he did not know from where, or from whom, but he knew. The weight of his words settled over them like a suffocating blanket. Then, a sharp sound like a strangled sob. Clara, the maid, had turned pale, gripping the edge of a chair as though the ground beneath her had turned unsteady. Poirot's gaze locked onto her, his voice softer now, but no less commanding. "You know something, mademoiselle." Clara's lips parted, her chest rising and falling rapidly. The room seemed to close in on her. The moment had come. The pie was about to be opened. And the birds were about to sing. A second murder. Just as Hercule Poirot begins to feel he's getting a handle on the Fortescue family's tangled web of secrets, another shocking twist throws everything into chaos. This time, it's not a family member who falls victim but one of Rex Fortescue's closest business associates. The victim is Gregory Nash, a key figure in the company Rex founded, and a man who had been seen arguing with Rex in the days before his death. Nash was known for his ambition, his ruthlessness, and his connections, qualities that made him indispensable to Rex, and now, tragically, a target. Poirot is summoned to the scene late at night. The mansion, though grand and imposing, feels smaller with every passing moment, as though the walls are closing in. The police have cordoned off the study where Nash's body was found, and the air is thick with the scent of stale cigar smoke and fear. Poirot steps inside, his sharp eyes scanning the room, already taking in every detail. The victim lies on the floor, a look of shock frozen on his face. There's no sign of struggle, no obvious weapon, just a deadly calm that sends a chill down the detective's spine. But it's the clue that's found with the body that sends the situation spiraling into a new level of horror. In Nash's hand, clutching the lifeless fingers, is another handful of rye grains. The same peculiar clue that had been found near Rex's body, the same clue that had confounded Poirot and pointed to something deeper than a simple poisoning. Poirot's growing sense of dread. Poirot steps back from the scene, his mind whirring. The similarity between the two deaths is chilling. The rye grains are not just a random detail. They are the linchpin of the mystery, a symbol of something darker, something twisted. Could it be a message from the killer? A signature? And why Nash? What ties him to Rex's death, other than being part of the very world Rex had controlled? As Poirot steps outside the room, his thoughts race. The pattern is undeniable, but more complicated than he'd originally anticipated. It's no longer just about the Fortescue family. The killer is clearly targeting everyone connected to Rex's business partners, associates, even close friends, and the method is eerily similar. A poisoning, followed by a subtle clue left behind. But what's the connection between the rye and the victims? And why now, after Rex's death? Suspense builds as the mystery deepens. Poirot realizes that with each murder, the stakes grow higher. The killer is growing bolder. First Rex, then Nash, who will be next. Poirot knows that he must act quickly, before the murderer strikes again, but the deeper he delves into the investigation, the more tangled the threads become. The police, now shaken by the second death, have few answers. The family members are terrified, especially now that someone close to Rex has been targeted. But Poirot's keen eye doesn't miss the subtle reactions, the fleeting expressions of guilt or fear in the eyes of the people around him. Everyone seems to be hiding something, and Poirot's instincts tell him that this second murder is no coincidence. It's a message, a challenge. The family, shaken and scared, begins to splinter under the pressure. Eleanor Fortescue, ever the picture of composure, now seems unglued, her mask slipping with every passing hour. Charles, Rex's son, is quick to point fingers at Nash's associates, his mind consumed by thoughts of inheritance and what Rex's business empire might now mean for him. Sarah, the daughter, grows colder, more distant. She retreats further into herself, her past actions coming back to haunt her. Even the servants who had once been so quiet and loyal are now on edge, their whispers carrying in the hallways. Poirot's suspicions grow. The closer he gets to the truth, the more elusive it becomes. The victims may have had ties to Rex, but who is the common link between them? Could someone in Rex's inner circle be orchestrating these murders for a reason far deeper than anyone realizes? The growing tension among the family. As the murders continue to pile up, the pressure on the Fortescue family is unbearable. Eleanor, once confident and elegant, now appears drawn, her eyes sunken with sleepless nights. She is no longer just the grieving widow, she is hiding something. But what? Charles, who had once seemed so self-assured, is beginning to unravel. He's losing his grip on the situation, becoming increasingly paranoid. The prospect of losing his inheritance has driven him to the edge, and it shows in his erratic behavior. He lashes out at anyone who questions him, his eyes wild with desperation. His hatred for his father's business decisions, his long-held resentment, now seems to fuel a darker, more dangerous energy. Sarah's behavior is equally strange. She is quieter than ever, retreating into herself with a coldness that sends shivers down Poirot's spine. Something is hidden behind her silken exterior, perhaps even a long-buried secret she can no longer keep under wraps. Poirot's intuition. Poirot's mind races as he pieces together the complex puzzle. The second murder, the eerie connection to the rhyme, and the rising tensions among the family members point to a chilling conclusion. The killer is closer than anyone suspects. The motive behind the murders is tangled, but the rhyme, the cryptic nursery rhyme, is the key. The killer is playing a dangerous game, using the rhyme to communicate with Poirot, daring him to solve the riddle before the next victim falls. But with each death, Poirot knows the killer grows bolder, and every move Poirot makes seems to push the murderer further into the shadows. The stakes are higher than ever, and Poirot feels the weight of the situation press down on him. The clock is ticking, and soon it may be too late. The final revelation. The investigation has dragged on for weeks, each step forward revealing more about the Fortescue family's secrets, and yet Hercule Poirot is no closer to understanding the full extent of the mystery. But as the clues come together slowly, painstakingly, Poirot realizes that he is on the verge of unraveling the darkest, most twisted secret of them all. The nursery rhyme, once dismissed as a harmless piece of nonsense, has been the key all along. The wry clue, the methodical nature of the murders, the growing tension within the family, all of it begins to make sense in a way Poirot hadn't anticipated. The rhyme wasn't a coincidence. It was a map, a code, a roadmap for revenge. Poirot stands in the dimly lit study, staring at the scattered notes, the lines of the rhyme now staring back at him like an encrypted message that he'd finally cracked. He whispers the rhyme under his breath, his voice low and deliberate. Sing a song of sixpence, a pocketful of rye, 24 blackbirds baked in a pie. When the pie was opened, the birds began to sing. Wasn't that a dainty dish to set before the king? Each line, each word is loaded with meaning, and Poirot knows now that it's not just a rhyme, it's a literal description of what has happened. The revelation. Poirot pauses and looks up, his sharp eyes catching every fleeting detail. The rhyme, he realizes, is a direct reflection of the events. The first line, sing a song of sixpence, a pocket full of rye, refers to the first victim, Rex Fortescue, and the rye found in his pocket, symbolic of the beginning of the twisted plan. Rex had been the king, the ruler of his family and empire, and his death had been the start of the game. The second line, 24 blackbirds baked in a pie, reflects the many members of the Fortescue family and their associates who have been ensnared in this deadly plot. The family is the pie, and each person within it, a blackbird, caught up in a scheme that no one saw coming. And the pie is the web of lies and secrets they've been trying to keep hidden for decades. The third line, "When the pie was opened, the birds began to sing," points to the moment when the truth begins to come to light. The murders weren't just about greed, they were about revenge. The family's dirty laundry, the betrayal, the lies, it's all coming out in the open. And with every revelation, the killer grows bolder. The final line, "Wasn't that a dainty dish to set before the king?" is the chilling conclusion. The murderer isn't just seeking revenge on Rex, they're seeking to bring down the entire empire he built, to punish every person who was complicit in the wrongs committed long ago. The king was the first casualty, but the entire family, the entire legacy, is the real target. Poirot's confrontation. As Poirot steps back from his thoughts, the pieces finally fall into place. The motives, the timing, the intricate details, all of it is tied to a deep-rooted grudge. Decades ago, there was a betrayal. A family member had been wronged in a way that left scars too deep to heal. The family's wealth and power had come at the expense of someone else, someone who had been pushed to the brink, someone who had been cast aside. The murders are not random. They are a carefully orchestrated revenge plot, one that has been years in the making. The first death, Rex's death, was merely the beginning. The killer's vengeance will not stop until the entire family is brought to its knees. Poirot gathers the family in the drawing room, the tension thick in the air. He knows the moment of reckoning is at hand. The final confrontation is inevitable. As the family members exchange anxious glances, Poirot's voice cuts through the silence. "It is time to reveal the truth," Poirot declares, his voice firm. The murders were not an accident, nor were they the work of a stranger. No, they were the work of someone who has been hiding in plain sight all along. Someone who was waiting for the right moment to strike. Someone who was wronged decades ago and who has been waiting for their chance at revenge. Suspense and twist. The family members gasp, their faces a mixture of shock and confusion. Who could it be? Who among them could have harbored such deep resentment, such an unrelenting desire for payback? Poirot turns his gaze to Eleanor Fortescue, Rex's widow. Her eyes widen, and for a moment Poirot catches a flicker of fear in Thema, brief, fleeting moment of panic that she quickly masks with a calm, collected expression. But it's too late. Poirot has already seen it. "You," Poirot says, his voice steady. "It was you, Mrs. Fortescue. You were the one who sought vengeance. You were the one who orchestrated it all." The room goes silent. Eleanor, the poised and elegant woman who had seemed so distraught after her husband's death, now stands frozen. Her composure falters, and for the first time, Poirot sees the true depth of her emotion: rage, grief, and a twisted sense of justice all intermingled. The shocking truth. Poirot's revelation is staggering. Eleanor Fortescue had been the one to engineer the revenge plot from the very beginning. But her motives weren't what anyone expected. It wasn't about money, nor was it about power. It was about a betrayal that had happened long ago, before her marriage to Rex, before the wealth and the mansion. Years earlier, Eleanor had been the victim of a horrific scandal. She had been disinherited, discarded, and left to fend for herself when Rex's family turned their backs on her. Rex had promised her marriage, a new life, but after securing her, he had abandoned her in every sense, isolating her, denying her the very support he had promised. He had promised to make things right, but it was a hollow gesture. In time, Eleanor grew bitter, consumed with resentment. She had waited for years, quietly plotting her revenge against Rex and his family. When Rex was finally murdered, she didn't simply mourn the loss, she saw it as the perfect opportunity to finish what she had started. Eleanor had manipulated everyone, played the role of the grieving widow, all the while orchestrating the deaths of Rex's associates, using the nursery rhyme as a coded message. A trail of breadcrumbs leading to the final reckoning. The rhyme wasn't just a clue, it was her twisted confession. Suspense and final twist. The family members are left stunned, unable to process the betrayal from within their ranks. Eleanor had been playing them all. But Poirot's final words leave them reeling. "There is one last thing you must know," Poirot says, his voice quiet but firm. "You have all been pawns in her game. The last murder, the final victim. It was never about revenge. It was about making sure that her secret stayed hidden forever. Eleanor's face pales, and a flicker of fear crosses her features once again. But it's too late. Poirot has already exposed everything. As Poirot steps back, he watches as the family members come to terms with the horror of the truth. Eleanor's mask has been shattered, and the cruelest betrayal of all has been revealed, not just to the family, but to everyone watching. The truth, when it comes, is always devastating. And in the end, Poirot's final words will echo in the minds of all who hear them. In a family, it is not the blood that binds, it is the secrets that destroy. The resolution. The investigation has reached its end, and the truth has finally emerged. Eleanor Fortescue, the matriarch who spent years weaving a web of deception, stands exposed. Her icy composure has melted away, replaced by the hollow emptiness of a woman whose carefully constructed world has collapsed around her. For years she harbored a seething resentment, a dark vendetta festering beneath the surface, until it reached its breaking point. Now, she stands before them, stripped of her illusions, revealed for what she truly is: a murderer, a manipulator, and the architect of the Fortescue family's downfall. The nursery rhyme, once dismissed as a harmless tune, now echoes with chilling clarity. The references to Rye, the king in his counting house, the queen in the parlorage, was a breadcrumb leading Poirot to the truth. It was never just a rhyme, it was a prophecy. As Eleanor is led away in handcuffs, her head held high but her eyes hollow, the remaining members of the family stand frozen in the grand drawing room. The air is thick with disbelief, the weight of betrayal pressing down on them like an unbearable burden. The truth has been laid bare, but its consequences are only beginning to unfold. The walls of the Fortescue mansion, once proud and imposing, now seem to shrink inward, suffocating those left behind in the wreckage of their family's darkest secrets. Suspense and the toll of the truth. Poirot stands apart, his gaze sweeping over the shattered remnants of the Fortescue family. He has solved the case, but he takes no pride in this victory. There is no satisfaction in unveiling the murderer when the cost is so steep. The lies, the betrayals, the years of hidden resentments, they have all come to the surface, and what remains is not triumph, but devastation. Charles, the eldest son, clenches his fists at his sides, his jaw tight with suppressed emotion. He had always sought his father's approval, always resented Rex's cold and distant nature. But now, knowing his own mother orchestrated his father's death, what is he left with? A bitter inheritance, stained with blood. He had once envied his father's power, but now, he wonders, was the fortune ever worth the price? Sarah stands near the fireplace, her delicate hands trembling as she grips the mantelpiece for support. Her mother, the woman who raised her, the woman she trusted, was a killer. The realization crashes over her in waves, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps. The warmth of the fire flickers against her pale face, but she feels nothing. The truth is colder than she ever could have imagined. The servants linger on the edges of the room, their presence once unnoticed, but now an unsettling reminder that no one in this house was ever truly innocent. Mr. Hargrove, the butler, his usually unshakable demeanor now betrays a hint of fear. Clara, the maid, avoids everyone's gaze, her hands wringing together in silent distress. They too have been part of this house of secrets, and now they must live with the knowledge of what they have witnessed. Poirot's final words. As Poirot prepares to leave, he turns back to face the family one last time. His eyes, sharp and unrelenting, scan their faces, reading their expressions as though they are open books filled with painful truths. His voice, when he finally speaks, is calm but weighted with meaning. "Do not think that with Eleanor's arrest the story is over," he says softly. "Non. The truth, mes amis, is like a shadow. It lingers long after the light has been shone upon it. The secrets that you have kept, the betrayals that have festered, they will not vanish simply because the culprit is gone." His words settle heavily over the room. Charles shifts uncomfortably, his eyes flicking to his sister. Sarah swallows hard, a sheen of unshed tears in her gaze. Even the servants seem unable to breathe. Poirot steps forward, his polished shoes clicking against the marble floor, each step deliberate, purposeful. You have uncovered a murderer, why, he continues, but you have not yet uncovered the cost of your silence. The choices you have made, the resentments you have nurtured, they will haunt you long after I am gone. He lets the silence stretch, letting his words sink in. Then, with a final glance at the broken family, he speaks the words that will echo in their minds for years to come. In a family, it is not the blood that binds it, it is the secrets that destroy. And with that, Poirot turns on his heel and steps out into the cold evening air, leaving behind a family in ruins.